The static crackled through Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell's headset, cutting through the chaos of emergency alarms filling the cockpit of her F-A-18 Super Hornet. 30,000 feet above the North Pacific, with her aircraft's engines failing and enemy missiles tracking her squadron, she heard something that made her blood freeze. "Blackbird 7, this is Phantom, I have your 6. Break left and dive on my mark." That call sign hadn't been used in 23 years. Phantom belonged to Captain Elena "Ghost" Vasquez, the most decorated female fighter pilot in Navy history, who had vanished without a trace during a classified mission over the South China Sea in 2001. Her aircraft was never found. Her body was never recovered. The Navy had declared her killed in action, and her call sign was permanently retired. No one was supposed to be using it. Ever. Sarah's radar screen showed only 3 aircraft in their formation, all accounted for. Her wingman, Lieutenant Torres, was maintaining position off her starboard wing. Commander Blake was struggling with his own mechanical failures 2 miles ahead. There was no 4th aircraft. There couldn't be. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Yet the voice that came through her radio was unmistakably female, calm and authoritative in a way that only came from years of combat experience. It carried the slight accent that older pilots remembered from the stories, the ones whispered in ready rooms and officer clubs when the brass wasn't listening. Elena Vasquez had been a legend even before she disappeared, the pilot who had single-handedly turned the tide during the Kosovo crisis, who had flown missions that officially never happened, who had earned a reputation for appearing when American pilots needed her most. "Phantom, identify yourself." Commander Blake's voice cut through the radio chatter, tension evident even through the static. "This frequency is restricted to Blackbird Squadron. Negative on the identification, Blackbird Leader. You've got company. Inbound from your 2 o'clock, 4 bogies closing fast. Recommend immediate evasive maneuvers." Sarah's threat warning system erupted into a symphony of alerts as 4 enemy aircraft appeared on her scope, exactly where the mysterious voice had indicated. They had been flying dark, using stealth technology that her squadron's radar couldn't penetrate. Whoever was talking to them had sensors that were decades ahead of anything the Navy currently fielded. The impossible became undeniable when Sarah caught a glimpse of something in her peripheral vision. A shadow moving through the clouds below, too fast and too agile to be any aircraft she knew. For just a moment, silhouetted against the gray Pacific sky, she saw the distinctive outline of an F-14 Tomcat, the twin-engine fighter that had been retired from service 15 years ago. The same aircraft Elena Vasquez had been flying when she vanished. "This is impossible," Torres whispered over the comm, his voice tight with disbelief. "That's Ghost's voice. I heard the recordings during flight training. But she's been dead for over 2 decades. The enemy missiles were closing now, streaking toward their formation with deadly precision. Sarah's aircraft was still losing power, her engines sputtering as hydraulic fluid leaked from punctured lines. They were sitting ducks, 3 damaged. Navy fighters against 4 state-of-the-art enemy interceptors in international waters where no help would come. "Blackbird Squadron, this is Phantom. Execute knife-edge maneuver on my count. 3, 2 mark." Without thinking, Sarah rolled her Hornet 90 degrees and pulled into a vertical climb that should have torn her aircraft apart. Somehow, her damaged fighter held together as enemy missiles streaked past, their proximity fuses triggered by what looked like electronic countermeasures that her aircraft wasn't equipped with. The sophisticated jamming signatures that appeared on her scope belonged to technology that wouldn't exist for another decade. Torres and Blake followed the mysterious instructions, their damaged aircraft performing maneuvers that defied their current mechanical conditions. Whatever was helping them wasn't just providing tactical advice. It was somehow enhancing their aircraft's capabilities in ways that modern science couldn't explain. Phantom, what's your position? Sarah called. Out, scanning the sky for any sign of their benefactor. I'm not showing you on scope. I'm where I've always been, Blackbird 7, watching over the ones who come after. The words sent chills down Sarah's spine. Every Navy pilot knew the stories about Elena Vasquez, the woman who had shattered every glass ceiling in military aviation before her disappearance. She had been the first female pilot to achieve A status in modern combat, the first woman to command a carrier air wing, the first to fly missions so classified that her service record was mostly redacted. Her legend had grown in the years. Since her loss, becoming something between fact and mythology. New pilots heard whispers about sightings, about damaged aircraft that somehow made it home against impossible odds, about enemy forces that inexplicably retreated just when American pilots faced overwhelming numbers. The old-timers called them ghost stories, tales told to boost morale and maintain the mystique of naval aviation. But the details were always the same: a female voice on the radio, an F-14 Tomcat appearing in peripheral vision, and miraculous saves that defied logical explanation. Sarah had dismissed those stories as military folklore, the kind of legends that grew around exceptional individuals who died young. Elena Vasquez had become naval aviation's equivalent of the Flying Dutchman, a spirit that supposedly haunted the skies to protect those who followed in her footsteps. It was romantic nonsense, the kind of mythology that appealed to pilots who lived with constant danger. Except now she was living it. The enemy aircraft were regrouping, their formation tightening as they prepared for another attack run. Sarah's squadron was still outnumbered and operating with severely compromised equipment. Their carrier was over 200 miles away, too far for immediate support. The nearest friendly forces were a Coast Guard cutter that couldn't provide air cover and a commercial shipping lane that would only complicate the engagement. Phantom, we need immediate assistance, Commander Blake transmitted. Our aircraft are damaged and we're running low on defensive countermeasures. Copy that, Blackbird leader. Maintain current heading and altitude. Help is already on the way. The radar scope lit up with new contacts, but these were friendly signatures broadcasting proper identification codes. A flight of 4 F-35 Lightning. 2 fighters appeared from the northwest, their advanced stealth capabilities having kept them invisible until they chose to reveal themselves. Their formation leader was calling for immediate assistance, responding to a distress signal that Sarah's squadron hadn't sent. Someone had summoned help before the crisis had fully developed, anticipating the threat with uncanny precision. The timing was perfect, almost as if their mysterious benefactor had been coordinating a rescue operation from the beginning. As the F-35s engaged the enemy aircraft, Sarah caught another glimpse of the impossible. The F-14 Tomcat was climbing away from the battle, its twin engines leaving contrails that spelled out a message in the sky, 3 letters that made her hands shake on the controls. Fly. It was Elena Vasquez's personal motto, the word she had inscribed on every aircraft she had flown. The same word that appeared on the memorial plaque at Naval Air Station Oceana, where an empty hangar was maintained in honor of pilots who never came home. The enemy fighters were retreating now, outnumbered and outgunned by the arriving reinforcements. Sarah's squadron was safe, their aircraft still damaged but no longer under immediate threat. The crisis was over as suddenly as it had begun, leaving behind only questions that had no rational answers. Phantom, do you copy? Sarah called into her radio. Phantom, please respond. Only static answered her. The F-14 was gone, vanished as completely as if it had never existed. Her radar showed no trace of a 4th aircraft, and the other pilots reported the same. Whatever had saved them left no electronic signature, no evidence that could be analyzed or explained. But Sarah knew what she had heard. She knew what she had seen. And she knew that somewhere in the vast Pacific sky, Elena Ghost Vasquez was still flying, still protecting the pilots who wore the same uniform, She had died defending. The question that would haunt her for the rest of her career was simple. How was any of this possible? 48 hours before Sarah Mitchell heard a dead woman's voice over the radio, she was sitting in the mundane fluorescent lighting of the Naval Air Station Oceana briefing room, trying to stay awake during another PowerPoint presentation about flight safety protocols. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, calcine razor, was everything the modern Navy wanted in a pilot: methodical, disciplined, and thoroughly unremarkable in all the ways that mattered for a 21st century military. Career. Her service record was spotless but unspectacular. Decent test scores at the Naval Academy, solid performance at flight school, competent ratings in every assignment without ever quite achieving excellence. She flew her missions by the book, filed her reports on time, and maintained the kind of professional distance that kept her out of both trouble and legend. At 32, she had exactly the career trajectory that would lead to a comfortable retirement as a mid-level officer, probably commanding a training squadron somewhere safe and boring. Sarah's apartment in Virginia Beach reflected the same. Careful mediocrity. Clean, organized, decorated with the kind of generic furniture that came from base housing catalogs. The only personal touches were a few family photos and a small collection of aviation books that she read to stay current on tactics and technology. No lovers stayed over regularly. No close friendships complicated her off-duty hours. She maintained pleasant professional relationships with her squadron mates, without ever letting anyone get close enough to really know her. The truth was that Sarah had chosen invisibility as a survival strategy. Growing up in a military family, she had learned early that women aviation lived under constant scrutiny. Every mistake was magnified, every success was questioned, and every personal relationship was analyzed for signs of favoritism or weakness. Her father, a retired Air Force colonel, had given her advice that she followed religiously. Keep your head down, do your job, and don't give them any reason to notice you unless it's for exceptional performance. That philosophy had served her well through 15 years of naval service, but it had also made her exactly the kind of pilot who blended into the background of squadron life. She wasn't the hotshot who pushed boundaries, the natural leader who inspired others, or the tactical innovator who changed how missions were flown. She was reliable, competent Sarah Mitchell, who could be counted on to execute orders without drama or distinction. The briefing room at Oceana was filled with the same type she had served alongside her entire career. Cocky young pilots fresh from flight school, seasoned veterans counting down to retirement, and ambitious officers who saw aviation as a stepping stone to flag rank. The walls were lined with portraits of squadron commanders dating back decades. A gallery of serious faces in dress uniforms that represented the evolution of naval aviation from propeller fighters to stealth jets. One portrait was conspicuously absent from the wall. Elena Vasquez had never officially commanded a squadron, despite being qualified for the position. Her service record was too classified, her missions too sensitive, and her disappearance too controversial for the kind of public recognition that came with formal command positions. But every pilot at Oceana knew her story, or at least the parts that weren't buried in Pentagon vaults. The ghost stories had started almost immediately after her disappearance. Pilots reported radio communications from an unidentified female voice during emergencies, offering tactical advice that proved uncannily accurate. Aircraft with mechanical failures somehow made it back to base despite damage that should have been catastrophic. Enemy forces inexplicably broke off attacks just when American pilots faced overwhelming odds. The incidents were always isolated, never quite rising to the level of official investigation, but the pattern was unmistakable to anyone who paid attention. Sarah had heard all the stories during her years of service, usually told in the informal settings where pilots shared experiences they couldn't put in official reports. A rescue in the Persian Gulf where a downed pilot was guided to safety by a voice that wasn't supposed to exist. An engagement over Afghanistan where superior enemy numbers mysteriously retreated after a female pilot reported seeing an impossible aircraft in her peripheral vision. Close calls and miraculous saves that happened just often enough to maintain the legend without ever providing concrete evidence. The rational explanation was obvious. Military folklore, the kind of mythology that grew around exceptional individuals who died young. Elena Vasquez had become naval aviation's patron saint, a comforting presence that pilots invoked when facing situations beyond their control. The human mind needed patterns and meaning, even in chaos, and the ghost stories provided both. They were psychological comfort food for aviators who lived with constant danger, a reminder that someone was watching over them, even when they flew alone. Sarah had always been skeptical of the supernatural elements, but she understood the psychological need they fulfilled. Aviation was a profession that demanded absolute confidence in technology and training, while operating in an environment where random mechanical failures could kill without warning. The idea that Elena Vasquez was still out there, still protecting American pilots, provided comfort that official channels couldn't offer. Her own connection to the Elena Vasquez legend was more personal than she usually admitted. Sarah's flight instructor at Pensacola had been Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Hayes, one of the few female pilots who had served alongside Elena during the 1990s. Hayes had shared stories that never made it into official histories, tales of a Kali pilot who seemed to possess an almost supernatural understanding of aerial combat and an unwavering commitment to bringing everyone home alive. According to Hayes, Elena had been the kind of pilot who appeared once in a generation, blessed with reflexes that couldn't be taught and tactical instincts that bordered on precognition. She had flown missions that remained classified decades later, operations that had shaped American foreign policy in ways that would never be publicly acknowledged. Her loss had been felt not just in the aviation community, but in the highest levels of the Pentagon, where classified assessments reportedly described her as irreplaceable. The official story of her disappearance was frustratingly vague, a routine reconnaissance mission over the South China Sea had gone silent. No distress calls, no debris field, no indication of what had happened to one of the Navy's most experienced pilots, flying one of its most advanced aircraft. The search operation had been extensive but futile, covering thousands of square miles of open ocean without finding any trace of Elena or her F-14 Tomcat. Conspiracy theories had flourished in the absence of official explanations. Some believed she had been shot down by forces that America couldn't officially acknowledge fighting. Others suggested she had been captured and was being held in a secret prison somewhere in Asia. The most romantic version held that she had discovered something too dangerous to report and had chosen to disappear rather than compromise national security. Sarah had never paid much attention to the speculation, but she had been moved by the memorial service held at Oceana every year on the anniversary of Elena's disappearance. It was a simple ceremony, attended by pilots from across the Navy who came to honor a woman whose official service record couldn't capture her true contribution to American aviation. The empty hangar that was maintained in her honor served as a reminder that some debts could never be fully repaid. What struck Sarah most about Elena Vasquez's story was how different their careers had been. Where Sarah had chosen invisibility and conformity, Elena had embraced distinction and leadership. She had pushed boundaries, challenged assumptions, and redefined what was possible for women in military aviation. Her legacy was built on the kind of bold decisions and exceptional performance that Sarah had spent her career avoiding. The irony wasn't lost on her. Elena Vasquez had become legendary precisely because she had refused to blend into the background, while Sarah Mitchell had achieved anonymity by following all the rules that Elena had written. They represented two different approaches to military service, two different ways of navigating the challenges that faced women in aviation. Now, Preparing for what would prove to be the most significant mission of her career, Sarah had no way of knowing that those different paths were about to converge in ways that would challenge everything she believed about courage, leadership, and the price of playing it safe. The briefing was ending, and pilots were filing out to prepare for the next day's training exercises. Sarah gathered her materials and headed for the door, planning to spend the evening reviewing flight manuals and getting to bed early. It was exactly the kind of routine that had defined her career: careful, predictable, and utterly forgettable. She had no idea that in less than 2 days, she would be living the kind of experience that created legends rather than simply hearing about them. The secure phone in Sarah's apartment rang at 0347 hours on a Thursday morning, jolting her from the deep sleep that came from years of military discipline. The caller ID showed only a series of numbers that identified it as coming from the Pentagon, specifically from a division that didn't officially exist on any organizational chart. Sarah had received exactly 3 such calls in her 15-year career, each one preceding missions that were never discussed in official reports. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, this is Admiral Catherine Ross. I need you at Norfolk Naval Base within the hour. Pat for an indefinite deployment." Admiral Ross was a name that carried weight in naval aviation circles, a former pilot who had climbed the ranks to become one of the Pentagon's most influential voices on air operations. She didn't make casual phone calls to mid-level officers, and she certainly didn't summon them in the middle of the night unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. "Ma'am, can you provide any details about the mission parameters?" "Negative. This conversation never happened, and you never received this call. Report to Hangar 7 at Norfolk. Come alone and tell no one where you're going." The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone in the darkness of her bedroom. Hangar 7 at Norfolk was officially used for aircraft maintenance, but pilots knew it served another purpose. It was where the Navy conducted operations that fell outside normal command structures, missions that required plausible deniability and absolute secrecy. Sarah dressed quickly in her flight suit, grabbed the go bag that every military pilot maintained, and made the drive to Norfolk in record time. The base was quiet at this hour, with only essential personnel manning security checkpoints. Her identification was verified at 3 separate gates, each one requiring additional authorization that confirmed this was no routine assignment. Hangar 7 was brightly lit despite the early hour, and Sarah could see unusual activity as she approached. Several aircraft were being prepared for immediate departure, their crew chiefs working with the kind of urgency that suggested combat operations rather than training exercises. A mix of F/A-18 Super Hornets and F-35 Lightning A's sat on the tarmac, their weapons pylons loaded with live ordnance that caught the harsh fluorescent lighting. Admiral Ross was waiting inside the hangar, her presence commanding immediate attention from everyone in the vicinity. She was accompanied by a man in civilian clothes, whose bearing identified him as intelligence community despite his unremarkable appearance. The tension in the hangar was palpable, the kind of electric atmosphere that preceded missions where people might not come home. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, thank you for responding so quickly. I'm going to brief you on a situation that officially doesn't exist, involving people who aren't supposed to be alive, conducting operations that never happened." Admiral Ross led Sarah to a secure briefing room adjacent to the hangar, where classified documents were spread across a conference table. The paperwork bore classification markings that Sarah had never seen before, security clearances that apparently existed above the levels she had been aware of during her career. 8 hours ago, we lost contact with a reconnaissance flight over the Spratly Islands. 2 F-35s conducting routine surveillance of Chinese military installations went dark without any distress signals or indication of mechanical failure. Satellite imagery shows debris in the water, but recovery operations are being hampered by the presence of Chinese naval forces in the area. Sarah studied the mission parameters displayed on the briefing room screens, The Spratly Islands were a flashpoint in the South China Sea, claimed by multiple nations but controlled primarily by China through artificial island construction and military occupation. American reconnaissance flights in the area were technically legal under international law but politically sensitive enough to require careful coordination. Ma'am, what makes this different from standard search and rescue operations? We have protocols for pilot recovery in contested areas. The civilian spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone accustomed to delivering information that would change lives. The pilots weren't conducting routine reconnaissance, Commander. They were investigating anomalous radar contacts that have been appearing in the area for the past 6 months. Contacts that match the signature of an F-14 Tomcat operating with electronic warfare capabilities that didn't exist when that aircraft was in service. Sarah felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. Every pilot in the Navy knew what F-14 signatures meant in the context of the South China Sea. There was only one Tomcat that had ever operated in those waters, and it had vanished 23 years ago, along with the most decorated female pilot. In naval aviation history, you're talking about Elena Vasquez. Admiral Ross nodded grimly. The Chinese have been reporting encounters with an unidentified American aircraft for months. Something that appears on radar intermittently, interferes with their operations, and vanishes before they can intercept. Their diplomatic protests have been classified at the highest levels because they're describing encounters with a pilot who's been officially dead for over 2 decades. The implications were staggering. If Elena Vasquez was alive, if she had been operating in Chinese-controlled waters for months, if she was somehow connected to the loss of 2 American pilots, then everything the Navy believed about her disappearance was wrong. The ghost stories that Sarah had dismissed as military folklore might be based on something far more complex and dangerous than supernatural intervention. The missing pilots were investigating these sightings when they were lost. Their last transmission mentioned contact with an unidentified aircraft that was providing tactical guidance. The voice signature analysis matches recordings of Captain Vasquez, but that's impossible according to every official record. Sarah studied the classified documents spread before her, trying to process information that challenged everything she thought she knew about naval aviation history. Elena Vasquez's service record was heavily redacted, but the visible portion suggested involvement in operations that went far beyond normal combat missions. References to deep cover assignments, technological testing programs, and liaison work with intelligence agencies painted a picture of a pilot whose true role had been carefully hidden from official histories. Ma'am, if Captain Vasquez is alive, why hasn't she made contact through official channels? Why operate in secret for over 20 years? The civilian leaned forward, his expression grave. Because according to our analysis, she may not be operating voluntarily. Intelligence suggests she was captured during her last official mission and has been held by forces that want to exploit her knowledge of American aviation capabilities. The aircraft she's flying has been modified with technology that represents a quantum leap beyond anything in our current inventory. The briefing room fell silent as the full scope of the situation became clear. Elena Vasquez, if she was alive, represented both an intelligence asset of incalculable value and a security breach that could compromise decades of military development. Her knowledge of classified programs, combined with 23 years of forced cooperation with hostile forces, made her simultaneously the most important rescue target and the most dangerous threat in naval aviation. Your mission, Commander, is to locate the missing pilots and determine the true status of Captain Vasquez. You'll be operating under deep cover with a small team of volunteers who understand that this mission doesn't officially exist. If you're captured, the Navy will disavow any knowledge of your presence in Chinese waters. Sarah looked at the mission parameters again, calculating the odds of survival against the political implications of failure. The Chinese military presence in the Spratly Islands was overwhelming. Their air defense systems were state-of-the-art, and their rules of engagement in territorial disputes were notoriously aggressive. A small American force would be operating hundreds of miles from friendly support in waters where any mistake could trigger an international incident. "Ma'am, what makes you think I'm qualified for this type of operation? My service record doesn't include deep penetration missions or special operations experience." Admiral Ross smiled for the first time during the briefing, but it was an expression that carried no warmth. "Because, Commander, according to our psychological profiles, you're exactly the kind of pilot who won't be tempted to make this personal." Elena Vasquez inspired loyalty that sometimes compromised judgment. "We need someone who can complete the mission regardless of what they discover about her fate." The compliment felt like an insult, highlighting exactly the qualities that had kept Sarah invisible throughout her career. She was being chosen not for exceptional skills or leadership potential, but for her ability to remain emotionally detached from situations that would compromise other pilots. Her carefully cultivated mediocrity had finally found its perfect application. "The aircraft you'll be flying have been modified with experimental stealth technology and extended range capabilities. Your call sign for this mission will be Seeker, and you'll be leading a flight of 3 other volunteers who have been briefed on the basic parameters. Departure is in 6 hours. Sarah stood to leave, her mind already shifting to mission planning mode. But one question remained that she couldn't ignore, a detail that would determine how she approached everything that followed. "Admiral, do you believe Elena Vasquez is still alive?" Admiral Ross was quiet for a long moment, studying classified documents that contained information Sarah might never be cleared to see. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of command decisions that had shaped naval aviation for decades. "Commander, I believe that, in 6 hours, you're going to find out what happened to the greatest pilot the Navy has ever produced. And I'm not sure any of us are prepared for what that answer might be." Sarah spent the next 4 hours trying to make sense of a mission that violated every principle of military planning she had been taught during 15 years of naval service. The briefing materials provided by Admiral Ross contained enough classified information to justify a court-martial, but they were missing crucial details that any competent pilot would need to execute a search and rescue operation in hostile territory. The intelligence reports on Chinese military positions were 3 weeks old, practically ancient in the rapidly evolving situation around the Spratly Islands. The satellite imagery showed air defense installations, but the analysis was incomplete and contained gaps that suggested deliberate omissions rather than collection failures. Most troubling of all, the electronic warfare signatures attributed to Elena Vasquez's aircraft defied every technical specification in the Navy's database. When Sarah requested updated intelligence through normal channels, she was told that current information was being processed by a joint task force that didn't appear in any organizational directory. Her clearance, apparently sufficient for receiving the mission assignment, was inadequate for accessing real-time data about Chinese defensive capabilities. The bureaucratic maze seemed designed to ensure that pilots would deploy with incomplete information. Her attempts to coordinate with other military branches were equally frustrating. The Air Force claimed no knowledge of operations in the South China Sea, despite having reconnaissance assets in the region. The Marines reported that their aviation units had been specifically ordered to avoid the Spratly Islands area without explanation. Even the Coast Guard, which sometimes provided search and rescue support for military operations, had received instructions to maintain radio silence about any activities near Chinese territorial claims. The 3 pilots assigned to Sarah's flight were equally confused by the contradictory information they were receiving. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, callsign Ghost, was a veteran F-35 pilot with extensive experience in electronic warfare operations. He had volunteered for the mission after being told it involved rescuing American pilots, but the briefing materials he received contained different details than Sarah's version. According to his documents, they were investigating potential technology theft rather than conducting search and rescue. Commander Angela Torres, Calcine Viper, brought deep strike experience from multiple combat deployments, but she had been briefed on the mission as a reconnaissance operation to assess Chinese military capabilities. Her targeting data focused on intelligence gathering rather than pilot recovery, suggesting that different Pentagon departments were providing conflicting guidance about mission objectives. Captain David Chen, Calcine Falcon, was the most experienced pilot in the group, with over 20 years of service including classified operations that he couldn't discuss. His briefing had emphasized the historical significance of Elena Vasquez's potential survival, but contained warnings about operational security that seemed designed to prevent him from sharing information with his fellow pilots. The discrepancies became more obvious as the team attempted to coordinate their mission planning. Standard protocols required unanimous agreement on objectives, threat assessment, and rules of engagement, but the 4 pilots had been given incompatible information that made coordination impossible. When Sarah tried to reconcile the differences through official channels, she was told that mission parameters were being updated in real time and would be finalized during flight. The aircraft modifications presented another layer of problems that suggested institutional dysfunction at the highest levels. The experimental stealth technology installed on their FA-18s was so new that technical manuals didn't exist, and the engineers who had performed the installations were forbidden from discussing operational limitations. The pilots were expected to fly untested equipment into combat without understanding its capabilities or failure modes. Even more concerning was the discovery that the electronic warfare systems had been programmed with engagement protocols that exceeded normal rules of engagement. The aircraft were equipped to respond to threats with lethal force based on automated threat assessment, potentially triggering international incidents without pilot authorization. When Sarah requested clarification about these protocols, she was told that authorization procedures were classified above her clearance level. The communications equipment installed for the mission presented the most troubling contradictions. While officially described as standard encrypted radio systems, the hardware included receivers calibrated to frequencies that hadn't been used by the Navy since the 1990s. The only aircraft that had ever operated on those frequencies were F-14 Tomcats, suggesting that someone expected the team to communicate with Elena Vasquez's aircraft using technology from her era. Sarah's attempts to verify the legitimacy of these modifications through normal maintenance channels revealed that the work had been performed by contractors with no official connection to the Navy. The companies responsible for the installations had security clearances that exceeded most Pentagon officials, but their corporate registrations traced back to shell companies and offshore entities that obscured their true ownership. The timeline for the mission created additional pressure that prevented thorough verification of equipment and procedures. Admiral Ross had emphasized the urgency of locating the missing pilots, but subsequent communications suggested that time constraints were artificially imposed rather than operationally necessary. The Chinese forces in the area weren't conducting active search operations, and weather conditions would remain favorable for several more days. When Sarah requested a 24-hour delay to properly test the modified aircraft and resolve the conflicting briefing materials, she was told that the mission window was closing due to political considerations that couldn't be discussed. The implication was that forces outside the military chain of command were driving operational decisions based on factors that had nothing to do with pilot safety or mission success. The breaking point came when Sarah discovered that their flight plan would take them through airspace that was officially restricted for a joint training exercise between American and Allied forces. No such exercise appeared in any public schedules or military coordination databases, suggesting that the cover story was fabricated to explain their presence in the area. More troubling was the realization that Chinese intelligence services would undoubtedly detect the deception, potentially treating their mission as an act of espionage rather than search and rescue. The rules of engagement provided for the mission were equally problematic, containing contradictory instructions about when pilots were authorized to defend themselves versus when they were required to withdraw from combat. The legal framework seemed designed to provide plausible deniability for the Pentagon, while leaving individual pilots vulnerable to both enemy action and court-martial proceedings. Sarah's final attempt to resolve these issues through official channels led to a conference call with representatives from multiple Pentagon departments, none of whom seemed to have complete information about the mission parameters. The National Security Council claimed that operational details were being handled by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who insisted that intelligence requirements were being managed by unnamed agencies that didn't appear in government directories. The conversation revealed that different branches of the military were operating with incompatible objectives for the same mission. The Navy wanted to rescue the missing pilots and determine Elena Vasquez's status. The Air Force was interested in recovering advanced technology that might have fallen into Chinese hands. Intelligence agencies were focused on assessing whether Elena Vasquez represented a security breach or an intelligence asset. Most damaging was the admission that no single authority had overall command responsibility for the mission. Each department claimed operational control over different aspects, ensuring that no one could be held accountable if the mission failed or triggered an international incident. The pilots were being sent into hostile territory without unified command structure or clear chain of responsibility. The final straw came when Sarah learned that the mission had been compartmentalized to such an extreme degree that even Admiral Ross lacked complete information about its true scope. The woman who had summoned Sarah in the middle of the night was apparently serving as a cutout for decisions being made at levels that exceeded her authority. The entire operation had been designed to ensure that no single individual could expose its full dimensions, facing deployment in 2 hours with untested equipment, incompatible briefing materials, and a command structure that seemed designed to fail. Sarah realized that following military protocols would guarantee disaster. The system that was supposed to support American pilots in combat had been compromised by bureaucratic incompetence, political manipulation, and institutional cowardice. She could follow orders and lead her team into a mission that would likely result in their capture or death. Or she could accept that sometimes saving lives required breaking the rules that were supposed to protect them. The choice was becoming clearer with each passing minute. Sarah made her decision while standing in the secure communications room at Norfolk Naval Base, watching classified messages scroll across multiple screens in real time. The latest intelligence updates confirmed what she had suspected. Their mission was being deliberately sabotaged by competing interests within the Pentagon. Someone wanted American pilots to fail in Chinese waters, and they were using bureaucratic chaos to ensure that failure looked like operational incompetence rather than institutional betrayal. The breaking point was a message from Admiral Ross that arrived 20 minutes before their scheduled departure. New intelligence suggested that Chinese forces had intercepted communications about the mission and were preparing to treat any American aircraft in the area as hostile intruders. The Admiral recommended a 48-hour delay while diplomatic channels attempted to defuse the situation through back-channel negotiations that could take weeks to complete. But buried in the same communication was a fragment of intercepted Chinese radio traffic that changed everything. Their intelligence services had identified the electronic signature of an F-14 Tomcat operating in the disputed waters, and they were planning a coordinated response to capture both the mysterious aircraft and any American rescue forces that attempted to reach the area. Elena Vasquez, if she was indeed alive and flying in those waters, had perhaps hours before overwhelming Chinese forces converged on her position. Sarah realized that following official protocols would not only doom the missing pilots but would also deliver Elena Vasquez into Chinese hands after 23 years of whatever captivity or exile she had endured. The greatest pilot in naval aviation history would become a prize for hostile intelligence services because her own Navy had chosen bureaucratic safety over operational courage. The secure phone on the communications room desk connected directly to Admiral Ross's private line. Sarah could call her superior, explain the tactical situation, and request immediate authorization for emergency departure. The Admiral would refuse, citing orders from higher authority and political considerations that exceeded military judgment. Sarah would be ordered to stand down, and in 6 hours she would watch news reports about Chinese forces capturing American military assets in international waters. Instead, Sarah walked to the secure terminal and began accessing files that her clearance level technically prohibited her from viewing. The computer systems at Norfolk were designed with overlapping security protocols, but they contained vulnerabilities that most officers either didn't know about or chose not to exploit. Sarah's background in computer systems, dating back to her undergraduate studies before she switched to naval aviation, provided knowledge that few pilots possessed. The password recovery protocols for the terminal were designed to accommodate emergency situations where authorized personnel needed immediate access to classified information. By combining her military identification with specific technical knowledge about system architecture, Sarah was able to escalate her security clearance for temporary access to intelligence databases that normally required authorization from Pentagon officials. What she discovered in those files confirmed her worst suspicions about the mission's true nature. Elena Vasquez hadn't disappeared during a routine reconnaissance flight 23 years ago. She had been conducting a deep cover operation to infiltrate Chinese military installations, using experimental stealth technology that made her aircraft effectively invisible to conventional radar systems. Her mission had been compromised by intelligence leaks within the Pentagon, forcing her to remain in exile to protect both herself and the classified technology she carried. The recent radar contacts reported by Chinese forces weren't evidence of Elena's capture or cooperation with hostile forces. They were proof that she was still conducting unauthorized operations against Chinese military targets, using 2 decades of accumulated intelligence to strike at strategic installations throughout the South China Sea. Her activities had been so successful that Chinese military leaders considered her a strategic threat requiring neutralization at the highest priority level. The missing American pilots had stumbled into this secret war while conducting their reconnaissance mission. Their aircraft had been damaged by Chinese forces, but Elena Vasquez had guided them to a hidden base that she had established on one of the disputed islands. The pilots were alive, but they were trapped in a location that Chinese intelligence was systematically searching using coordinated air and naval operations. Sarah now understood why different Pentagon departments had provided conflicting briefing materials for the rescue mission. Some officials wanted to extract Elena Vasquez and exploit her intelligence about Chinese capabilities. Others preferred to eliminate her as a security risk who knew too much about classified programs that had evolved during her years of exile. Still others were actively working to ensure that Chinese forces captured all American personnel in the area, providing plausible deniability for intelligence failures that reached the highest levels of government. The communications equipment installed on their modified aircraft wasn't designed for standard military operations. It was calibrated to Elena Vasquez's frequencies because someone intended for the rescue team to locate her hidden base and either extract her or eliminate her as a threat to institutional security. The mission had been designed to provide multiple Options for dealing with a problem that officially didn't exist. Sarah downloaded the complete intelligence files to a secure storage device, committing multiple federal crimes in the process. The information she was stealing included satellite imagery of Elena's hidden base, technical specifications for the experimental aircraft she was flying, and detailed assessments of Chinese military capabilities that could reshape American strategic planning for decades. Possessing this information without authorization was an act of espionage that could result in life imprisonment. But Sarah needed it to give her team any chance of completing their real mission. Her next violation of military protocol involved accessing the aircraft modification records that had been classified above her clearance level. The experimental technology installed on their FA-18S was far more advanced than she had been told during the official briefing. The stealth capabilities approached those of the most classified aircraft in the American inventory, and the electronic warfare systems could penetrate Chinese air defenses that were considered impregnable by conventional forces. More importantly, the aircraft had been equipped with communication systems that could interface directly with Elena Vasquez's F-14 Tomcat. The mysterious frequency calibrations weren't just for receiving her transmissions. They were designed to establish tactical data links that would allow coordinated operations between aircraft separated by 23 years of technological development. Someone had anticipated that Elena would need electronic support for operations that exceeded the capabilities of 1990s technology. Sarah spent the next 30 minutes reprogramming the mission parameters in their aircraft's navigation computers. Instead of following the official flight plan that would take them through areas where Chinese forces were waiting in ambush, she programmed a route that would use terrain masking and electronic warfare tactics to approach Elena's hidden base from an unexpected direction. The new course would violate international airspace agreements and could be interpreted as an act of war, but it offered their only chance of reaching the missing pilots before Chinese forces closed the trap. The most difficult decision involved her team of volunteer pilots, who had no idea that their mission briefings contained deliberate misinformation designed to ensure operational failure. Sarah could attempt to explain the true situation, risking the possibility that one of them would report her violations to higher authority. Or she could lead them into combat under false pretenses, using their trust to accomplish objectives that exceeded their understanding of the mission. Sarah chose a middle path that honored their courage while protecting them from knowledge that could destroy their careers. She accessed their personnel files and discovered that each pilot had volunteered for the mission based on personal connections to Elena Vasquez's legend rather than blind obedience to orders. Lieutenant Webb's father had served in Elena's squadron. During the 1990s, Commander Torres had written her senior thesis at the Naval Academy about Elena's contributions to tactical aviation. Captain Chun had been inspired to become a pilot after meeting Elena during a recruiting event when he was in high school. They weren't just following orders. They were attempting to honor a debt that the Navy had never officially acknowledged. Sarah could work with that motivation without revealing the full scope of what they were walking into. The final step in her unauthorized mission planning involved disabling the tracking systems that would allow Pentagon officials to monitor their aircraft during the operation. The modifications required technical knowledge that exceeded standard pilot training, but Sarah's computer background provided the skills needed to alter navigation and communication protocols without triggering automatic alerts. By the time she finished her preparations, Sarah had committed enough federal crimes to justify multiple court-martial proceedings and decades of imprisonment. She had stolen classified information, exceeded her security clearance, modified military aircraft without authorization, and planned operations that violated international law. There was no path back to the safe, invisible career that had defined her service for 15 years. But for the first time since joining the Navy, Sarah felt like she was doing something that mattered more than following orders. The first indication That Sarah's unauthorized mission was unraveling came 47 minutes after takeoff, when her radar warning receiver detected a surface-to-air missile system that shouldn't have existed in their operational area. The Chinese had repositioned their most advanced air defense platforms during the night, creating a defensive network that turned what should have been a covert approach route into a killing field stretching across 50 miles of disputed airspace. Lieutenant. Webb's voice crackled through the encrypted communication system, tension evident despite his professional training. Seeker, I'm reading multiple SA-21 sites that weren't in the intelligence briefing. These positions can engage targets at altitudes we can't avoid without compromising our stealth profile. Sarah studied her tactical display, watching as additional radar signatures appeared across their projected flight path. The Chinese military wasn't just responding to their presence. They had anticipated the exact route that her unauthorized planning had selected. Someone with access to American flight planning protocols was feeding information to hostile forces, turning their stealth technology into a liability rather than an advantage. Ghost, Viper, Falcon, execute radio silence protocols. We're flying into prepared positions that suggest operational compromise at the highest levels. The modification to communication procedures violated their mission briefing, but Sarah's team followed her lead without question. They had trained together enough to recognize when tactical flexibility was required, even if they didn't understand the political implications of what they were encountering. Their trust in her judgment was about to be tested in ways that none of them had anticipated. Commander Torres's aircraft was the first to encounter active resistance when her electronic warfare systems triggered an automated response from a Chinese destroyer that was operating outside its normal patrol area. The ship's radar had been modified with capabilities that exceeded intelligence estimates, suggesting technological cooperation between Chinese forces and unknown third parties who understood American stealth signatures. Contact, bearing 215. Range 30 miles. I'm being painted by a naval radar system that's tracking my stealth configuration. This technology shouldn't exist in their inventory. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized that Elena Vasquez's 23 years of exile might have involved more than just hiding from her own government. If she had been captured and forced to cooperate with Chinese military development programs, her knowledge of American aviation technology could have revolutionized their defensive capabilities. The very woman they were attempting to rescue might have provided the tools being used to hunt them. The tactical situation deteriorated rapidly as Captain Chun reported multiple aircraft climbing from Chinese military bases throughout the region. The responding fighters included aircraft types that American intelligence had classified as experimental prototypes, suggesting that their mission had triggered a response from special operations units rather than routine air defense forces. Seeker. This is Falcon. I'm counting 16 aircraft inbound from multiple vectors. Electronic signatures indicate advanced jamming capabilities and extended range missiles. We're looking at coordinated engagement from forces that were pre-positioned for exactly this scenario. Sarah checked her navigation display and realized that continuing on their planned route would result in engagement with overwhelming Chinese forces within minutes. The stealth technology that was supposed to provide invisibility had been compromised by intelligence leaks or technological advances that rendered American advantages obsolete. They were flying blind into a trap that had been carefully prepared by adversaries who understood their capabilities better than their own commanders. The decision to abort the mission would have been the rational choice, but Sarah knew that retreat would doom the missing American pilots and deliver Elena Vasquez to forces that had been hunting her for over 2 decades. The window for official rescue operations was closing as political considerations trumped military necessity, leaving her unauthorized mission as the only chance for bringing American personnel home alive. All aircraft implement emergency frequency protocols. We're shifting to backup communication channels that aren't in our official inventory. The command required her team to use radio frequencies that were technically prohibited for military aircraft, channels that had been reserved for intelligence operations that officially didn't exist. Sarah was gambling that Elena Vasquez would be monitoring these frequencies, but she was also risking detection by American intelligence services that might interpret their communications as evidence of espionage or treason. Lieutenant Webb's voice carried new urgency when he reported mechanical failures that couldn't be explained by normal operational stress. Seeker, my electronic warfare systems are showing degraded performance. The modifications made to our aircraft are failing under combat conditions. I'm losing defensive capabilities that were supposed to be our primary advantage. Sarah's worst fears about the experimental technology were being confirmed in real time. The Pentagon contractors who had installed the stealth modifications had equipped them with systems that hadn't been properly tested under operational conditions. The advanced capabilities that were supposed to make their mission possible were becoming liabilities that exposed them to enemies who were better prepared than American intelligence had anticipated. The navigation computers that had been reprogrammed with Elena's hidden base coordinates began showing inconsistent information as Chinese electronic warfare systems attempted to jam GPS satellites and disrupt inertial guidance systems. Sarah found herself flying by visual reference and dead reckoning through airspace where a single navigational error could result in violation of territorial boundaries that would justify lethal force against her aircraft. Commander Torres reported the most troubling development when her threat warning systems detected missiles being launched from positions that weren't showing up on any radar displays. Multiple launches from stealth platforms. Someone is using our own tactics against us with technology that matches or exceeds our current capabilities. The revelation that Chinese forces possess stealth aircraft with capabilities comparable to POO, America's most classified programs, suggested intelligence compromises that reached far beyond Elena Vasquez's disappearance. Sarah was leading her team into combat against adversaries who had been systematically penetrating American military secrets for years or decades, using that knowledge to neutralize technological advantages that military planners considered decisive. Personal cost of her unauthorized mission became clear when Sarah realized that her violations of protocol had been detected by American monitoring systems. Her secure communication device began receiving priority messages from Admiral Ross, demanding immediate response and threatening court-martial proceedings for failure to comply with direct orders. The woman who had trusted Sarah with classified information was now being forced to choose between operational security and personal loyalty. Sarah ignored the messages, but she couldn't ignore the implications for her team. They had followed her lead into a situation that would destroy their careers, regardless of whether they survived the mission. Lieutenant Webb would face questions about his father's connection to Elena Vasquez. Commander Torres would be investigated for academic research that might have compromised operational security. Captain Chun would lose security clearances that had taken decades to obtain. The radar display showed Chinese forces closing from multiple directions, their formation indicating coordinated tactics that suggested extensive planning rather than reactive response. Sarah's team was flying into the center of a strategic operation that had been designed to capture or eliminate American personnel who possessed knowledge about classified programs, spanning multiple decades. The fuel gauges on all 4 aircraft showed consumption rates that exceeded normal parameters, indicating that the electronic warfare environment was forcing their engines to work harder than designed. They would reach Elena's hidden base with minimal reserves, assuming they survived the gauntlet of Chinese forces that was systematically eliminating their escape routes. Sarah's throat mic picked up her whispered prayer as she realized that her team was committed to a mission that would either vindicate Elena Vasquez's 23 years of exile or result in the loss of 4 more American pilots to forces that had been systematically hunting them since takeoff. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So, if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. All aircraft, maintain formation and prepare for engagement. We're about to find out what Elena Vasquez has been protecting all these years. The mountains of the Spratly Islands appeared on the horizon, their peaks obscured by storm clouds that would provide concealment for the final approach to coordinates that existed only in classified files that Sarah had stolen from her own government. Behind them, Chinese forces were converging with the patience of hunters who had been tracking their prey for hours. Ahead lay answers that might justify the destruction of 4 military careers and the violation of international law. Sarah pushed her throttle forward and led her team into the unknown. The storm clouds that Sarah had counted on for concealment became a nightmare of turbulence and electrical interference as her formation descended toward the coordinates of Elena Vasquez's hidden base. Lightning strikes disabled 2 of Lieutenant Webb's navigation systems, leaving him flying on backup instruments that hadn't been designed to penetrate the sophisticated, jamming environment surrounding the disputed islands. The weather that should have provided cover was systematically stripping away their technological advantages. Commander Torres's aircraft suffered a catastrophic failure when a lightning strike overloaded the experimental stealth systems, causing them to short-circuit in a cascade of sparks that illuminated her cockpit like a 4th of July display. The advanced technology that had been installed without proper testing was proving vulnerable to environmental conditions that any competent engineer should have anticipated during the design phase. Seeker, this is Viper. I've lost stealth capability and my electronic warfare suite is offline. I'm flying naked through hostile airspace with multiple boogies converging on our position. Sarah's tactical display showed the devastating truth of their situation. Chinese aircraft were approaching from 6 different vectors, their formations indicating a level of coordination that suggested months of preparation rather than reactive scrambling. Her team was flying directly into a trap that had been designed specifically to capture American pilots attempting to reach Elena Vasquez's location. Captain Chun's voice cut through the radio static with information that changed everything. Sarah thought she knew about their mission. Seeker, I'm picking up American identification signals from the base coordinates. Multiple aircraft on the ground, including at least 2 F-35s that matched the signatures of our missing pilots. The revelation should have been encouraging, but Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized the implications. If American aircraft were already at Elena's base, if the missing pilots had successfully reached their destination, then why had they maintained radio silence for over 48 hours? Why hadn't they attempted to return to friendly territory when their fuel situation became critical? The answer came when Sarah's long-range sensors detected the electronic signatures of Chinese military equipment surrounding the island base. Elena Vasquez's hidden facility wasn't a sanctuary where she had been conducting guerrilla operations against hostile forces. It was a prison where Chinese intelligence services had been holding American personnel while conducting interrogations that could compromise decades of classified military programs. All aircraft, abort approach. Repeat, abort approach. The base is compromised and under hostile control. But Lieutenant Webb's response carried desperation that made retreat impossible. Negative, Seeker. My fuel state is critical, and I'm showing multiple system failures. I can't make it back to friendly territory. Whatever's down there, it's my only chance for survival. The experimental modifications to their aircraft had consumed fuel at rates that exceeded all projections, leaving the entire formation with insufficient reserves for the return flight to American-controlled territory. Sarah realized with growing horror that her unauthorized mission had been designed to fail from the beginning, delivering 4 more American pilots to Chinese forces that had been systematically capturing personnel with knowledge of classified Programs. Commander Torres reported visual contact with the island facility, her description confirming Sarah's worst fears about what they would find. Seeker, I can see the base. It's a major installation with permanent structures, radar installations, and what looks like a prisoner detention facility. This isn't some hidden refuge. It's a full-scale intelligence operation. The Chinese forces that had been pursuing them suddenly broke off their attack, allowing Sarah's formation to approach the island without interference. The tactical shift made no sense unless the enemy wanted American aircraft to land at the facility, adding to their collection of personnel and technology that could be exploited for intelligence purposes. Sarah's secure communication device activated. With a priority message from Admiral Ross, the encrypted transmission somehow penetrating the jamming environment that had been disrupting their other communication systems. The message contained information that shattered every assumption about Elena Vasquez's disappearance and the true nature of their current mission. Sarah, you're flying into a facility that's been under Chinese control for over 20 years. Elena Vasquez has been cooperating with hostile intelligence services since her capture in 2001. The missing pilots were sent to gather evidence of her treason, not to rescue her. Your mission was designed to provide additional personnel for a prisoner exchange that involves the highest levels of government. The words hit Sarah like physical blows as she realized that her unauthorized mission had been anticipated and manipulated by forces that operated far above her security clearance level. Elena Vasquez wasn't a war hero conducting secret operations to protect American interests. She was a collaborator who had traded classified information for personal survival, spending 23 years helping Chinese military forces understand and counter American aviation capabilities, the ghost stories that had inspired a generation of female pilots were carefully constructed mythology designed to conceal the reality of the Navy's greatest intelligence disaster. Elena's mysterious appearances during emergency situations weren't supernatural interventions. They were carefully orchestrated operations conducted with Chinese authorization to maintain her credibility within American military circles. Captain Shun's radar detected incoming aircraft that carried Chinese military markings but flew with formation discipline that suggested American training. Contact bearing 090, multiple aircraft approaching in standard U.S. Navy formation patterns. Electronic signatures indicate modified Chinese fighters flown by personnel with advanced tactical training. Sarah understood immediately what they were facing. Elena Vasquez hadn't just provided the Chinese military with technological intelligence. She had trained their pilots in American tactics, creating hybrid forces that combined Chinese equipment with American operational knowledge. The aircraft approaching their formation were flown by Chinese pilots who had been educated in American military doctrine by the woman who had once been considered the greatest pilot in naval aviation history. The island base came into visual range, revealing a sophisticated facility that bore no resemblance to the hidden refuge described in classified intelligence reports. Permanent structures housed advanced radar systems, communication installations, and aircraft maintenance facilities that could support extended operations. This wasn't a secret hideout. It was a major intelligence installation that had been operating under American oversight for decades. Sarah's navigation computer began receiving approach instructions on frequencies that matched Elena Vasquez's historical communication patterns. The voice providing landing guidance carried the unmistakable accent and speech patterns that old-timers remembered from the stories, but the instructions were directing them to land at a facility where Chinese military personnel were waiting to take them into custody. Blackbird formation, this is Phantom. You are cleared for approach to runway 27. Maintain current heading and reduce airspeed to approach configuration. Elena Vasquez was indeed alive, and she was personally directing American pilots into captivity using the same call sign that had inspired legends about supernatural protection. The woman who had become a symbol of courage and sacrifice was collaborating with enemy forces to capture the pilots, who had volunteered to rescue her. Lieutenant Webb's aircraft was trailing smoke from multiple system failures, his options reduced to landing at the Chinese facility or attempting a water ditching that would certainly result in his death. Commander Torres faced similar mechanical problems, her experimental stealth systems having failed so completely that she was barely maintaining controlled flight. Captain Chun's fuel gauges showed reserves insufficient for any destination other than the island runway. Sarah realized that her team was trapped by circumstances that had been carefully orchestrated to ensure their capture. The mechanical failures weren't coincidental. They were the result of sabotage built into the experimental modifications that had been installed on their aircraft. The mission timeline had been designed to ensure that fuel consumption would make retreat impossible once they reached the operational area. The secure communication device activated, again with a final message from Admiral Ross that confirmed Sarah's understanding of their hopeless situation. "Sarah, you have 2 minutes to decide whether you're going to land voluntarily or be shot down by aircraft that are already targeting your formation. The prisoner exchange requires live American pilots, but the Chinese will accept dead ones, if necessary." Sarah looked at her fuel gauge, her aircraft's failing systems, and the tactical display showing Chinese forces in overwhelming numbers. Every option led to the same result: capture or death in service of a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of American government. But Elena Vasquez had made one crucial mistake in her carefully planned trap. She had underestimated the woman she was trying to capture. Sarah had spent 15 years being invisible, following orders, and avoiding the kind of attention that destroyed military careers. But invisibility had taught her things about military systems and bureaucratic weaknesses that more celebrated pilots never learned. She activated communication frequencies that Elena Vasquez didn't know existed, and began broadcasting on channels that would reach American submarines operating in international waters. The trap was about to become a battlefield. The emergency frequency that Sarah activated connected her directly to USS Helena, a Los Angeles-class attack submarine that had been shadowing Chinese naval operations in the South China Sea for the past 6 months. The submarine's communication officer, Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes, recognized Sarah's voice immediately. They had served together during Sarah's early career, before Hayes had transferred to the submarine service. "Seeker, this is Shadowfish. We've been monitoring your situation and have intelligence that changes everything you think you know about that facility." The revelation came in fragments as Hayes transmitted classified information that had been gathered through months of underwater surveillance operations. The installation that appeared to be a Chinese intelligence facility was actually a joint operation between Elena Vasquez and a select group of American intelligence officers who had been operating outside official channels since 2001. The Chinese military personnel on the island were defectors who had been providing information about Beijing's military capabilities for over 2 decades. Seeker, Elena Vasquez never collaborated with hostile forces. She's been running the most successful intelligence operation in modern naval history, using her apparent death to gather information that has prevented multiple conflicts between American and Chinese forces. Sarah's worldview shattered as she realized that everything she had been told about Elena's treason was deliberate misinformation, designed to conceal an operation that had been protecting American interests through methods that couldn't be officially acknowledged. The missing American pilots hadn't been captured. They had been recruited into an intelligence network that operated with authorization from Pentagon officials whose names appeared on no organizational charts. The aircraft approaching her formation weren't Chinese fighters flown by pilots trained in American tactics. They were American aircraft operated by personnel who had been officially declared dead or missing in action. allowing them to conduct operations that provided plausible deniability for activities that violated international law. Elena Vasquez had been building a ghost squadron of pilots who could engage in combat operations without creating diplomatic incidents. Lieutenant Commander Hayes transmitted additional intelligence that revealed the true scope of Elena's unauthorized mission. The facility you're approaching houses the most advanced intelligence analysis center in the Pacific. Elena has been intercepting Chinese military communications, tracking their submarine movements, and providing early warning about military buildups that would otherwise go undetected until it was too late to respond. The experimental technology that had been installed on Sarah's aircraft suddenly made sense in this new context. The modifications weren't designed to fail during their mission. They were prototypes of systems that Elena's team had been developing using captured Chinese equipment and reverse-engineered American technology. The apparent mechanical failures were actually controlled shutdowns that would allow the advanced systems to be analyzed and improved by Elena's technical specialists. Sarah's secure communication device activated with a transmission from Elena Vasquez herself, her voice carrying the authority and confidence that had made her legendary among naval aviators. But instead of directing them into captivity, Elena was providing intelligence about Chinese forces that were genuinely hostile to American operations in the region. Sarah, you've walked into the middle of an operation that's been protecting American naval forces for over 20 years. The real Chinese military is approaching from the northwest with orders to eliminate both my facility and your aircraft. We have approximately 18 minutes before overwhelming forces arrive to destroy everything we've built here. The tactical display confirmed Elena's warning as new radar contacts appeared on the horizon, their formation patterns and electronic signatures indicating genuine Chinese military forces operating with lethal intent. The aircraft that Sarah had identified as threats were actually Elena's defensive forces, positioned to protect the island facility from discovery by Beijing's intelligence services. Elena's voice continued with information that transformed Sarah's understanding of their entire mission. The Pentagon officials who sent you here belong to a faction that wants to eliminate my operation because it threatens their control over intelligence gathering in the Pacific. They've been providing classified information to Chinese forces in exchange for favorable trade agreements and technology transfers that benefit their post-retirement careers. The corruption extended far beyond Elena's apparent collaboration with enemy forces. Senior Pentagon officials had been systematically compromising American military operations to advance personal financial interests, using their security clearances to provide Chinese intelligence services with information about American capabilities and operational plans. Elena's unauthorized intelligence gathering had uncovered evidence of treason that reached the highest levels of the defense establishment. Sarah realized that her unauthorized mission had been designed to eliminate Elena and her evidence of high-level corruption while providing the Pentagon conspirators with a plausible explanation for the loss of American personnel. The experimental aircraft modifications were intended to fail catastrophically, ensuring that no witnesses survived to report what they had discovered about the true nature of Elena's operations. Sarah, the missing pilots you were sent to rescue, volunteered to join my operation after discovering that their commanding officers were working with Chinese intelligence. They're alive and well, but they can never return to official service because they possess information that would expose decades of institutional betrayal. Lieutenant Webb's voice crackled through the radio static with new urgency as his radar detected the approaching Chinese forces. Seeker, I'm counting over 30 aircraft inbound from multiple vectors. These aren't the same signatures we encountered earlier. This is a full-scale military response designed to eliminate everything in this area. Elena's facility had been exposed by the Pentagon conspirators who wanted to eliminate evidence of their collaboration with Chinese intelligence services. Beijing had been convinced that the island installation represented an American intelligence operation that threatened their national security, when in reality it had been protecting both American and Chinese interests by preventing the kinds of incidents that could escalate into open warfare. Commander Torres reported visual contact with aircraft launching from the island facility, their markings and configurations confirming that Elena had been operating a squadron of officially non-existent American military assets. Multiple F-14s and modified F-35s taking off from the base. These aircraft show American modifications, but carry no official identification. The Ghost Squadron that Elena had assembled included pilots who had been declared killed in action during classified missions, aircraft that had been reported destroyed, but secretly salvaged and upgraded, and support personnel who had volunteered to disappear from official records in order to conduct operations that protected American interests without creating diplomatic complications. Captain Chun's communication equipment detected transmissions between Elena's aircraft and American submarine forces that had been coordinating defensive operations throughout the region. Seeker, I'm monitoring communications that indicate extensive coordination between the island facility and multiple U.S. Navy assets. This operation has been protecting shipping lanes and monitoring Chinese military activities for years. Sarah understood that Elena Vasquez hadn't betrayed her country. She had sacrificed her official identity to serve American interests in ways that couldn't be acknowledged through normal military channels. The woman who had become a legend through ghost stories had literally become a ghost, operating outside official recognition to protect the nation that had declared her dead. The approaching Chinese forces represented the culmination of a conspiracy that involved Pentagon officials who had been systematically compromising American security for personal gain. They had convinced Beijing that Elena's facility posed a threat to Chinese interests, when in reality it had been preventing the kinds of intelligence disasters that could destabilize the entire Pacific region. Elena's voice returned with tactical information that would determine whether any of them survived the next 20 minutes. Sarah, I'm transmitting coordinates for a defensive position that will allow your aircraft to coordinate with my squadron. But you need to understand that once you accept this mission, you can never return to your official identity. The people who sent you here will ensure that you're declared dead rather than allow you to expose their corruption. Sarah looked at her fuel gauge, her aircraft's failing systems, and the tactical display showing overwhelming Chinese forces approaching from multiple directions. She could attempt to withdraw and face court-martial for her unauthorized actions, or she could join Elena's Ghost Squadron and spend the rest of her career protecting American interests from the shadows. The decision would define not just her future, but the fate of an intelligence operation that had been preventing conflicts between nuclear powers for over 2 decades. She activated her radio and made the choice that would transform her from invisible pilot to legendary ghost. Phantom, this is Seeker. We're joining your formation and requesting immediate tactical guidance. The real battle was about to begin. The coordinated attack began 60 seconds after Sarah's formation joined Elena's Ghost Squadron, with Chinese J-20 stealth fighters emerging from cloud cover in a formation that demonstrated tactical sophistication beyond anything American intelligence had attributed to Beijing's Air Force. Their approach vectors had been calculated to exploit the island's radar shadows while positioning them for simultaneous strikes against both the facility and the defending aircraft. Elena's voice cut through the tactical frequency with the calm authority that had made her legendary during her official career. All Phantom aircraft execute Phoenix formation. Blackbird flight, maintain high cover and coordinate electronic warfare support. We have one chance to survive this engagement and expose the conspiracy that brought us all here. The F-14 Tomcats that launched from the island facility moved with precision that defied their theoretical obsolescence. their pilots executing maneuvers that combine decades of combat experience with modifications that enhance their aircraft's capabilities beyond original specifications. Sarah watched in amazement as aircraft that should have been museum pieces outperformed the most advanced fighters in the Chinese inventory. Lieutenant Webb's damaged electronics suite suddenly came back online as Elena's technical team activated remote override protocols that stabilized his failing systems. "Seeker, my aircraft is responding to commands I'm not giving. Someone is flying my plane better than I can." The revelation that Elena's team had developed remote assistance capabilities explained how damaged American aircraft had been making miraculous recoveries throughout the Pacific theater for over 2 decades. The ghost stories about supernatural intervention had been covering sophisticated technological support that allowed Elena's specialists to guide endangered pilots to safety from hundreds of miles away. Commander Torres found herself executing attack runs against Chinese positions, with targeting data that appeared on her displays faster than her own sensors could acquire it. Multiple missile locks on targets I can't even see. This targeting information is coming from sources that don't exist on any intelligence database. Elena's intelligence network included surveillance satellites that had been officially decommissioned, but secretly maintained by contractors who understood that intelligence gathering required resources that couldn't be acknowledged through normal budget processes. The Ghost Squadron had access to reconnaissance capabilities that exceeded those available to official military units. The Chinese attack faltered when their pilots discovered that American forces possessed electronic warfare capabilities that rendered their advanced stealth aircraft visible to targeting systems that shouldn't have been able to detect them. Captain Chun watched enemy fighters breaking formation as their confidence in technological superiority evaporated under defensive measures that they hadn't anticipated. "Phantom Leader, this is Falcon. Enemy forces are withdrawing to regroup. Their electronic signatures indicate confusion about our defensive capabilities." Elena's response carried satisfaction mixed with grim determination as she explained the tactical situation that was unfolding. The Chinese pilots were told they were attacking a secret American intelligence facility that threatened their national security. They're discovering that someone provided them with false information about our capabilities and intentions. The secure communication frequency activated with transmissions from USS Helena, which had been monitoring the engagement while coordinating with additional American submarine forces positioned throughout the region. Lieutenant Commander Hayes reported developments that confirmed Elena's assessment of the broader conspiracy. "Phantom Leader, we're intercepting communications from Beijing indicating that Chinese military leadership is demanding answers about who authorized this attack. Their operational commanders were given false intelligence about your facility's threat level and defensive capabilities. The real-time intelligence intercepts revealed that Pentagon conspirators had manipulated both American and Chinese forces into a confrontation that was designed to eliminate Elena's operation while providing cover for their own intelligence sharing arrangements with Beijing. The corruption had reached levels that threatened the fundamental security of both nations." Sarah's tactical display showed additional Chinese forces approaching the area, but these aircraft carried diplomatic markings that indicated a change in operational status. The engagement was being terminated by political authorities who had discovered that their military forces had been manipulated into attacking an installation that posed no threat to Chinese interests. Elena's voice carried new urgency as she explained the window of opportunity that was opening for exposing the conspiracy that had endangered both American and Chinese personnel. "Sarah, we have approximately 40 minutes before this incident disappears into classified files that will never see public scrutiny. If we're going to expose the corruption that caused this confrontation, we need to act now." The evidence that Elena's team had gathered over 23 years included detailed records of Pentagon officials who had been providing classified information to Chinese intelligence services in exchange for post-retirement consulting contracts and technology, transfer agreements that violated federal law. The documentation was sufficient to trigger investigations that would reach the highest levels of the defense establishment. Lieutenant Webb's communication system activated with a priority message from Admiral Ross, her tone indicating that political developments were occurring faster than anyone had anticipated. "Sarah, you need to return to American-controlled territory immediately. Congressional oversight committees are demanding answers about unauthorized operations in the South China Sea." The message confirmed that Elena's intelligence about congressional awareness was accurate. Legislative oversight officials had been investigating reports of unauthorized military activities that exceeded the scope of normal operations, and Sarah's mission had triggered scrutiny that Pentagon conspirators couldn't control through normal bureaucratic channels. Commander Torres reported that her aircraft was receiving approach instructions from the USS Ronald Reagan, a carrier that had moved into position to provide recovery support for American aircraft operating in the disputed area. "Seeker, I'm being directed to land on the Reagan for immediate debriefing by congressional investigators who are already aboard the ship." The political implications were staggering as Sarah realized that Elena's intelligence network included legislative officials who had been investigating Pentagon corruption, independently of the executive branch agencies that had been compromised by the conspiracy. The Ghost Squadron had been providing information to congressional oversight committees that couldn't be obtained through normal intelligence channels. Captain Chun's radar detected additional aircraft approaching from American territory. Their formation patterns indicating VIP transport rather than combat operations. Multiple aircraft inbound from friendly territory, including what appears to be congressional delegation transport. Elena's final transmission to Sarah's formation carried both relief and sadness as she explained the resolution that was unfolding. "Sarah, the evidence your mission helped to confirm will result in prosecutions that reach the highest levels of the Pentagon. But it will also mean the end of our unauthorized operations, which have been protecting American interests for over 2 decades. The Ghost Squadron that Elena had built would be disbanded as congressional investigators demanded accountability for operations that had been conducted outside official oversight. The pilots who had sacrificed their official identities to serve American interests would face uncertain futures as their contributions were finally acknowledged through legitimate channels. Sarah's secure communication device activated with a message from the Attorney General's office, indicating that federal prosecutors were already preparing cases against Pentagon officials who had been identified through Elena's intelligence gathering. The corruption that had threatened both American and Chinese security was being addressed through legal channels that would provide justice for decades of institutional betrayal. The immediate crisis was over, but the larger battle for accountability was just beginning. Sarah had led her team into a mission that exposed corruption at the highest levels of government while vindicating a woman who had spent 23 years protecting her country from the shadows. As her formation approached the USS Ronald Reagan for recovery operations, Sarah understood that her decision to violate orders had triggered investigations that would reshape American intelligence operations for decades to come. The ghost had finally been brought home, and her evidence would ensure that the real traitors faced justice. 3 months after Sarah Mitchell led her unauthorized mission into the South China Sea, she sat in a packed congressional hearing room watching Pentagon officials attempt to explain how a conspiracy involving defense contractors, intelligence agencies, and foreign governments had operated for over 2 decades without detection. The hearing was being broadcast live on every major news network, marking the first time that classified military operations had been subjected to public scrutiny at this level. Admiral Catherine Ross occupied the witness chair, her distinguished career now overshadowed by testimony about how institutional failures had enabled corruption that reached the highest levels of naval command. The woman who had summoned Sarah to Norfolk Naval Base was methodically detailing a conspiracy that had compromised American military operations throughout the Pacific, while enriching officials who had sworn oaths to protect national security. The evidence provided by Captain Elena Vasquez and corroborated by Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's mission demonstrates systematic betrayal of American military personnel for personal financial gain. Admiral Ross testified, her voice carrying the weight of institutional shame that would reshape military culture for generations. Elena Vasquez herself had testified earlier in the week, her first public appearance since being declared killed in action 23 years earlier. The woman who had become naval aviation's greatest legend appeared before Congress in a dress uniform bearing decorations that reflected her true service record, including medals for operations that were being declassified specifically to allow public recognition of her contributions. The congressional investigation had confirmed that Elena's Ghost Squadron had prevented at least 12 potential military confrontations between American and Chinese forces, saving countless lives while gathering intelligence that had shaped American foreign policy throughout the Pacific region. Her sacrifice of official recognition had enabled operations that protected both nations from the consequences of the corruption that had infected the defense establishment. Sarah's own testimony had focused on the institutional failures that had forced her to violate direct orders in order to serve American interests. Her detailed account of bureaucratic incompetence, conflicting mission briefings, and deliberate sabotage had provided Congress with evidence that military personnel were being systematically betrayed by the officials who were supposed to support them. The 3 pilots who had followed Sarah into the unauthorized mission had also testified, their accounts corroborating the systematic deception that had characterized their briefings and preparation. Lieutenant Webb described equipment failures that were designed to ensure operational failure. Commander Torres detailed intelligence reports that contained deliberate misinformation. Captain Chun explained communication protocols that were intended to prevent coordination with friendly forces. The investigation had resulted in indictments against 17 Pentagon officials, including 2 generals and an admiral who had been providing classified information to Chinese intelligence services. The charges included treason, conspiracy, bribery, and violations of federal laws governing the protection of national security information. The trials were expected to continue for years as prosecutors worked through evidence that documented decades of institutional betrayal. Defense contractors who had been involved in the conspiracy faced their own legal challenges as congressional investigators discovered that experimental technology had been deliberately sabotaged to ensure the failure of missions that might expose the corruption. The companies responsible for modifying Sarah's aircraft were being investigated for fraud, conspiracy, and violations of federal procurement regulations that carried criminal penalties. Elena's intelligence network was being integrated into official military operations through congressional oversight that ensured transparency while protecting ongoing intelligence gathering activities. The Ghost Squadron was being formally recognized as a special operations unit with authorization that provided legal protection for activities that had previously operated outside official channels. Sarah found herself assigned to a new position within the Navy's Inspector General's office, where her experience with institutional failures was being used to reform oversight procedures and prevent the kind of corruption that had nearly resulted in her death. Her role involved investigating reports of misconduct, reviewing operational procedures, and ensuring that military personnel had access to legitimate channels for reporting criminal activity. The position was a dramatic departure from the invisible career that Sarah had cultivated throughout her naval service. Instead of avoiding attention and following orders without question, she was now responsible for challenging authority and ensuring accountability at all levels of the military hierarchy. The transformation from compliant officer to institutional watchdog required skills that her previous experience had never developed. Elena Vasquez had been reinstated to active duty with promotion to Rear Admiral, recognition that reflected both her true service record and the institutional debt that the Navy owed for 23 years of unauthorized sacrifice. Her first official assignment involved establishing new protocols for intelligence operations that balanced operational security with congressional oversight. Requirements. The ghost stories that had inspired a generation of naval aviators were now understood as evidence of Elena's ongoing commitment to protecting American personnel despite being officially dead. Her mysterious appearances during emergency situations had been carefully planned operations designed to provide assistance while maintaining the cover that allowed her intelligence gathering to continue undetected. The empty hangar at Naval Air Station Oceana that had been maintained in Elena's honor was converted into a training facility where military personnel could learn about ethical decision-making and the importance of institutional accountability. The memorial that had honored her sacrifice was replaced with displays that celebrated her contributions to American security and the courage required to challenge corruption. Sarah's apartment in Virginia Beach had been transformed from a sterile reflection of institutional conformity into a home that celebrated personal relationships and individual achievement. The generic furniture had been replaced with mementos from her mission, photographs with her new colleagues, and books about leadership and institutional reform that reflected her evolved understanding of military service. The aviation supply shop that Sarah had once imagined owning after retirement became a reality when she established a consulting business that helped military contractors understand the ethical requirements of defense work. Her experience with institutional corruption provided unique insights that were valuable to companies that wanted to avoid the legal and reputational consequences of the Pentagon scandals. Elena's influence on military culture extended far beyond the specific conspiracy that her intelligence gathering had exposed. Her example of choosing institutional accountability over personal safety had inspired reforms that gave military personnel legitimate channels for reporting misconduct without fear of retaliation. The courage that had driven her to sacrifice her official identity was being institutionalized through policies that protected whistleblowers and encouraged ethical decision-making. The broader implications of the congressional investigation reached beyond military reform to reshape how Americans understood the relationship between individual conscience and institutional loyalty. Elena and Sarah's actions had demonstrated that true patriotism sometimes required violating orders and challenging authority, lessons that resonated throughout American society. The Chinese government had conducted its own investigation into the intelligence sharing arrangements that had nearly resulted in an unnecessary military confrontation. Several officials who had been receiving classified American information were prosecuted for corruption, while reforms were implemented to prevent manipulation by foreign interests seeking to destabilize military relationships. Sarah's decision to violate direct orders and lead an unauthorized mission had triggered changes that reached far beyond her individual career or the immediate crisis that had prompted her actions. The institutional courage that she had displayed during those critical hours over the South China Sea had become a model for military personnel who faced similar ethical dilemmas in own service. The woman who had spent 15 years being invisible had become a symbol of the importance of individual action in protecting institutional integrity. Her transformation from compliant officer to ethical leader demonstrated that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they chose courage over comfort and accountability over advancement. Elena Vasquez had finally come home from her 23 years in exile. But her greatest legacy was the proof that individual conscience could triumph over institutional corruption when supported by people willing to risk everything for what was right. Sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is refuse to follow orders that betray the values you've sworn to protect. 5 years later, Sarah Mitchell stood on the deck of the USS Elena Vasquez, the Navy's newest aircraft carrier, named in honor of the woman who had redefined what it meant to serve with honor. The ship's commissioning ceremony was attended by hundreds of pilots who had been inspired by Elena's story, including many women who had joined naval aviation because they believed that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things. Elena herself served as the ship's first commanding officer, her presence a daily reminder that true leadership sometimes required sacrificing everything for principles that transcended personal ambition. The ghost who had haunted the skies of the Pacific for over 2 decades had become the Navy's most visible advocate for institutional accountability and ethical decision-making. Sarah's daughter, born 2 years after the South China Sea mission, played on the flight deck while her mother delivered the keynote address about courage and conscience to the newest class of naval aviators. The little girl wore a miniature flight suit with Future Admiral embroidered on the name tag, representing a generation that would inherit military institutions reformed by their parents' willingness to challenge corruption. The congressional investigation had resulted in 27 convictions and reforms that transformed how America conducted intelligence operations throughout the world. The Ghost Squadron's methods had been incorporated into official protocols that balanced operational security with democratic oversight, ensuring that future operations served national interests rather than personal enrichment. But perhaps the most important legacy was the proof that individual action could reshape institutions when guided by moral courage rather than career advancement. What incredible act of heroism will we explore next? This story of Elena Vasquez and Sarah Mitchell shows that legends aren't born. They're made by ordinary people who refuse to accept extraordinary injustice. If stories like this inspire you to believe in the power of individual courage, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest tales of heroes who changed the world. Share this video with anyone who needs to remember that sometimes the most important battle is the one fought for what's right, not what's easy. What other military mystery should we investigate? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. And let's uncover more stories that prove heroes walk among us every day.